They thought we were primitives, latecomers to the stars. But when 12 galactic civilizations tried to put humanity in its place, we showed them what happens when you underestimate the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We didn't fire a single shot, and we changed the balance of power forever. Before we begin, if you love stories where humanity isn't just surviving in the stars, but outsmarting entire galaxies, make sure you're subscribed. This one's not just about war. It's about what makes us truly terrifying. Now let me show you what happened when Earth stepped into the galactic arena. The star cruiser Whisperfall eased into the docking bay of Echelon Spire with a muted tremor, like a heartbeat lost in metal. Out of the pressure lock stepped Dane Corrin, his charcoal gray suit hugging him like a shadow. Just behind, Commander Alira Voss followed silently, cradling a compact case and a slim data slab in her gloved hands. On the surface, they were indistinguishable from any minor envoy dispatched from a fringe colony seeking favor from the galactic elite. Dane wasn't a figure who turned heads. Short of stature, lean of frame, and carved in the kind of forgettable mold that defied scrutiny. His sable hair was meticulously parted, his expression unreadable as they drifted through the artificial daylight of the corridors. Creatures of all shapes and atmospheres flowed around them. None paused. To the interstellar crowd, he was nothing more than a blip in the pattern, a primitive from an underdeveloped dust ball daring to speak among titans. Alira matched his pace, her gaze slicing through the strange geometry of the station. Echelon Spire was an architectural titan. Its chambers spun out like a neural web, engineered for the biological chaos of 12 alien dominions. Each sector pulsated with its own breathable cocktail, its own gravity rhythm. The humans had been allotted a corner niche, functional, forgettable, and far from the center. First time witnessing this much divergence in one construct. Dane murmured, voice like brushed steel. Alira gave a respectful nod. Astounding, sir, but the mood feels distant. A ghost of a grin tugged at Dane's lip, but never matured. That's their usual stance, Commander. To them, we're hatchlings with fire in our hands. They passed into the heart of the diplomatic labyrinth, where the decision-makers of the 12 convened. Among them, the Dravanti loomed, gargantuan beings clad in battle sashes and ceremonial alloys, their obsidian skin like forged armor. Their chieftain, Archspeaker Ralix, tracked Dane's entrance with scorn barely veiled behind his glinting ocular ridges. Nearby, the Cinther Guild whispered and clicked, a hive of multi-limbed tacticians resembling armored locusts. Their envoy, Lexicon Karn, muttered something in a staccato pulse to its adjutant. Judging by the rasp in its cadence, it wasn't a welcome mat. The chamber buzzed with other entities, scalebacks, first riders, ether form avatars. A few were beyond taxonomy, living enigmas birthed in realms where physics bent. Yet, one trait unified them, the gaze they cast on humanity, that look of bewildered dismay, as if dogs had started quoting philosophy. A synthetic voice bled from the ceiling's calm array. Envoy Corrin, you are summoned to Chamber 9. Initial dialogues are commencing. Dane brushed invisible lint from his lapel, gathering his weathered folio. This is it, Alira. Showtime. Chamber 9 was engineered to fold reality for the comfort of the 12. Every seat could reconfigure for species anatomy, atmospheric needs, or gravitational bias. Dane slipped into his designated seat, stationed at the outermost edge of a crescent of power. The others were already poised, diplomatic sharks, centuries old, who swam through political oceans deeper than Earth had ever known. From the far side, Warlord Vaskrin of the Dravanti inclined forward, his voice the echo of crushed stone. So, the flame crawlers send another mouthpiece. The room chilled. Dane met the warlord's stare with unflinching calm, letting silence answer first. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he let the weight of their underestimation stretch like taut wire. I represent soul accord, not crawling flames, Dane replied, voice low but carried by conviction. We may be young to your eyes, General, but time is not the sole measure of value. From across the chamber, Lexicon Karn emitted a clicking series of tones, its translator lighting up after a delay. The primates have learned manners. Fascinating. More murmurs rolled through the room, some bemused, some hostile, most indifferent. None offered welcome. Dane opened his folio with slow precision. He laid out a single, encoded dossier. We came to propose collaboration, shared defense parameters. Our region of space is no longer stable. Vaskrin let out a noise between a laugh and a snarl. Your region is irrelevant. Your kind barely understands stellar drift, let alone threats beyond the veil. Alira's hands clenched under the table. Dane placed a hand near hers, an anchor of restraint. Perhaps, Dane said, but we've intercepted signals. Movement from beyond the black zone. It's not just our systems at risk. That earned silence. Brief. Calculated. Then a reptilian delegate, skin shimmering like oil on water, hissed in disapproval. Fear makes poor evidence, Ambassador. Karn's limbs fluttered. And cooperation requires trust. Your kind have nothing to barter. Dane took a breath, not deep, but steady. You misunderstand. We're not offering a trade. We're offering a warning. More silence. He continued, voice like distant thunder. A structure non-native has appeared in the void beyond Serevan reach. We sent a recon drone. It never returned. What followed was not natural. We have audio, visuals, timestamps. He tapped the data slab. Holograms sparked into the air above them, twisting metal, impossible geometry, frequencies that made the room vibrate slightly wrong. Alive. Now they were listening. Vaskrin narrowed his eyes. And you came to us instead of hiding behind your moon rocks. Why? Because, Dane said, we know what it feels like to be dismissed, overlooked. But even ants know when the forest is burning. A beat. Rayleigh sat back, unreadable. Karn's appendages stilled. The others said nothing. For the first time since stepping aboard Echelon Spire, Dane Corrin wasn't invisible. He was a harbinger. And now, the 12 had to decide whether they would listen, before the dark truly arrived. The voice was cavernous, an iron bell rung in low gravity, soaked in authority. So, the Terrans show themselves at last. We were beginning to suspect your kind had wisely chosen to stay caged in your tiny star cradle. A ripple of chuckles, or what passed for amusement among species that didn't smile, echoed through the vast chamber. Dane Corrin remained unfazed. He unclasped his weathered folio, drawing out a plain stylus and a thin-bound note slate. Outdated tech, but reliable. We appreciate this opportunity to speak, he said evenly. The Soul Accord is committed to forging peaceful ties with the ecliptic conclave. Lexicon Karn's limbs tapped furiously across his tri-screen console, the clicks echoing like rainfall. His translator buzzed out a sharp response. Peaceful ties, he repeated, his inflection tinged with irony. A common phrase from civilizations standing at the edge of oblivion. The chamber stirred again with alien mirth, dry hisses, throat clicks, tonal vibrations. Dane scribbled something on his slate, his hand unwavering. A delegate shaped like a fusion of avian predator and scaled beast leaned forward, craning its beaked face toward him. Your species is, what, 10,000 orbits old? We were navigating quasars before your oceans knew multicellular life. Dane dipped his head with respectful gravity. A remarkable legacy. Time forges wisdom. Wisdom, rumbled Warlord Vaskrin, folding massive arms across his armored chest. Teaches when to extinguish embers before they become wildfires. His obsidian frame shifted closer in his reconfigurable throne. Your kind has been spreading. Too fast. Too boldly. Colonies blooming. Ships multiplying. armaments advancing. And that, he paused, raises concern. Beside Dane, Commander Elira Voss subtly tensed. She knew that tone, not just from aliens, from hunters, from those who circle before they strike. Humanity's roots run deep into the soil of wonder, Dane replied, still writing. We chase the unknown not with weapons, but with questions. Surely that urge is universal. Curiosity, Karn echoed, his voice almost a hiss. A volatile compound when mixed with unrefined logic and emergent tech. Your species thrives on conflict, with itself, no less. Wars. Fractures. You poisoned your own skies. What makes you believe we'd wager trust on such volatility? For the first time since the talks began, Dane lifted his gaze from the slate. His eyes were unreadable, quiet, distant, but unmistakably clear. You've studied us. Thoroughly. That's commendable. Knowledge prevents chaos. Indeed, said Vaskrin, nodding with mock gravity. Which is why we've designed a framework for your species, a path forward. One that acknowledges your limitations. A shimmering data slab slid down the length of the obsidian table toward Dane. He received it without comment, eyes scanning the text in silence. Elira watched him closely, searching for some trace of emotion. But his face was stone. After several minutes, Dane placed the slab gently on the table, fingertips lingering as if weighing it by touch alone. This is illuminating, he said softly. Excellent, Karn replied. Your assigned sector will offer ample room for development. Within your sun's sphere, of course. Exploration ends there. No expansion beyond the fourth orbit, Karn buzzed, his mandibles twitching in satisfaction. No research into restricted tier technologies. No armed craft breaching system borders. And of course, random compliance audits will be conducted. Precisely, he added with a gleeful trill. Civilization among the stars thrives when each species accepts its station. Dane Corrin jotted another line across his slate, his stylus gliding like ink across glass. The gesture looked more like poetry than note-taking. And should humanity decline these generous terms? He asked, voice smooth, unmoved. The room shifted. A silence settled like frost. Vaskrin's massive frame leaned forward, the deep gray of his skin growing almost storm-dark. Then your kind will experience interstellar order the hard way, he growled. There are many ways to educate a reckless species. Few of them are pleasant. Heads nodded, some quietly, others without hiding their approval. The warning coiled in the air, thick and heavy like ash drifting from a fire not yet seen, but deeply felt. Dane closed his slate, slowly, deliberately. His gaze swept the gathered envoys. He smiled. It wasn't warm. Gentle beings, he said, voice low, I think there's been a rather catastrophic misreading of who stands before you. Dawn rose over the station's solar mirrors, casting golden veins through the high atrium glass as the full conclave gathered in the central negotiation sphere. The chamber was vast, its ceiling disappearing into mist, its walls segmented into 12 species-controlled environments. Each zone catered to unique atmospheres, gravities, and lighting. The human sector was compact, barely more than a nook with 2 modest chairs. Dane arrived unchanged, same austere suit, same weathered portfolio tucked beneath one arm. His gait remained unhurried, composed. Elira Voss followed with quiet intensity, her eyes sweeping the room like sensors tuned for tension. One by one, the sections filled. 12 species, 12 kinds of intellect, anatomy, and power. And all of them watching the 2 Terrans step into the eye of a silent storm. At the central podium stood High Regent Beekser, towering above all but the Dravanti. His polished uniform was a curtain of gleaming metals, each reflecting a war won, a border held, a civilization humbled. His 8-foot frame radiated command. The conclave acknowledges the delegation from Earth, Beekser declared, his voice carrying like a war drum. Envoy Corin, you have reviewed our terms. What say your people? Dane stood without haste and descended to the central dais, a lone figure framed by alien architecture and ancient empires. The entire chamber seemed to still, save for the ambient hum of environmental systems, keeping 12 ecosystems alive. Thousands of eyes, compound, luminous, reflective, fixed on him. He began. The conclave's offer, he said, his voice calm yet resonant, demonstrates strategic foresight and careful coordination. He paused. The silence was iron. However, he continued, Earth, with due respect, must decline. A rustle of discord swept through the chamber. Insectoid wings buzzed. Scaled throats rumbled. Others let out shrill tones like pressure valves cracking. None of it sounded like welcome. Lexicon Karn surged upright from the Synther enclave, his arms a flurry of movement. You refuse, he spat, voice rising with static. You dare reject what is far beyond your due? You've been in the void less than half a century. A few outposts clinging to frozen rock, and suddenly you believe you stand among giants. Dane Corin scribbled a line in his slate, unbothered by the fury circling him. Every culture has the right to chart its own path, he answered, his tone even. We don't seek elevation, just parity. Warlord Vaskrin let out a noise that could have cracked stone. Parity, he repeated, like tasting the word and spitting it out. You misunderstand your station entirely. The stars are not anarchy. They are aligned by merit, by power, by foresight. Your species has demonstrated neither. Around the circle, gestures of assent bloomed. Antennae twitched, vocal sacs pulsed, claws tapped. Elira Voss noticed her fingers had curled into her palms. She forced herself to ease them. Dane, meanwhile, remained a statue in fabric and flesh. Then perhaps, he offered, we can explore what equitable terms might resemble. Earth is open to boundary protocols, regulated trade, lawful cooperation. We come with no banners of war. No war, came the sharp voice of the Corvani Archsire, a towering beast of ember-red scales and knife-blade eyes. Your kind swims in blood. You war over soil, beliefs, pigments of skin. Your world is a graveyard stacked on every horizon. Another envoy hissed agreement. We've seen your kind before, promising peace while hoarding plasma cannons. Dane tilted his head, voice contemplative. You've done your homework. That's prudent. But I wonder if you've read past the headlines. Karn's limbs blurred again over his data console. We've seen enough. Endless skirmishes. Ruined skies. A society split by greed and class. If you are advanced, it is only in destruction. A storm of guttural sounds swept the room, mocking, condemning. The temperature of the chamber felt as if it had risen, though only Elira seemed to sweat. The disdain in the room was palpable, like standing beneath a collapsing sky. General Vaktra, a war-clad brute from the Veiled Dominion, broke the chorus with a cold edge in his voice. The terms are more than fair. Isolation to your home star. Controlled exchanges. Monitoring for unauthorized tech development. That's generosity, not punishment. And if we reject your charity? Dane asked, his tone as soft as the hum of his stylus. Once again, silence descended. Heavy. Electric. Then High Regent Beekser advanced, each step of his massive limbs reverberating through the platform. He loomed like a thunderhead over Dane, casting a shadow long and cold. If you turn away, Beekser said, his voice a low drum roll, then Earth will learn why this galaxy is governed by order. He paused. There are consequences for those who ignore the gravity of balance. Consequences, you say? Echoed another delegate from the shadowed sector of the Oryx Compact. Trade nullification. Tech restrictions. Biozone quarantines, offered Warlord Vaskrin, his obsidian lips curling. Or more persuasive alternatives. Young species often learn best through demonstration. Dane Corin closed his slate gently, the echo of the click oddly final in the charged air. He surveyed the chamber, not with fear, not with fury, just stillness. That eerie stillness Alira had seen before, during wartime operations when Dane became something colder than steel. So, Dane said, "Our options are surrender or retribution." Precisely. Lexicon Karn buzzed with glee. "In time, your kind will understand the wisdom we offer. You'll find purpose within your limitations." "Submission breeds survival," said the Corvani archsire, nodding with condescension. "Like hatchlings warned not to grasp open flames," mocked a voice from the back. Alien laughter ignited again, discordant, multi-voiced, clattering against the high chamber dome like hail. It was the sound of empires amused. Dane stood unmoving in its center, unflinching. "Hatchlings playing with fire," he echoed softly, so low the words barely rose above a breath. Yet somehow, every being in the room heard it. The laughter faltered. "Barely sentient apes," Karn sneered, unaware of the shift. "Meddling with tools they don't understand. Speaking as though they belong among the architects of stellar law. You negotiate like fleas speaking to titans." Another round of scornful amusement burst forth. But Alira saw it. Dane's posture serene. His fingers loose. Not trembling. Not clenched. Still. Like an apex predator waiting beneath camouflage. He opened his slate again. Just one small note. Then he looked up. The change in his eyes made Alira take a half step back without realizing it. They were still placid, still level, but something beneath had awoken. Something primal. "Honored delegates," Dane said softly. His voice was a scalpel, cutting cleanly through the laughter. "I believe there's been a profound error in perception." The chamber went dead silent. For the first time since the summit began, no sound echoed off the steel-etched walls. Even the environmental systems seemed to hush. Dane stood alone on the center dais, his hands calmly at rest, eyes watching them all like a storm building behind a pane of glass. Every delegate leaned in, each trying to understand the sudden shift in gravity they felt but couldn't see. Vaskrin spoke first, voice now edged in anger. His charcoal skin had darkened, a sign Alira recognized from battlefield reports. "Mistake," he growled. "The only mistake here is your delusion that your kind holds any leverage at all." Dane tilted his head, as if tuning into a signal just outside the spectrum. "Leverage," he repeated softly. "An interesting metric. May I ask, General, about your own command history?" That caught Vaskrin slightly off guard. "I've led Dominion fleets for over 200 cycles. I've subjugated 17 stellar provinces in service to the Dravani regime. Why would that concern you?" "You've done well, General," Dane said, and for once there was genuine admiration in his voice. 17 systems. That's no small feat. Vaskrin's chest expanded with pride. 6 species opposed us. All were brought to heel. All now serve the Dravani cause. They remember the cost of resistance. Dane's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. 6 species, 200 years, roughly one major war every 3 decades. A deliberate pace. Calculated expansion. Across the room, Lexicon Karn twitched in annoyance, his limbs a blur over his interface. "What's your point, Terran? Are you here to recite statistics? We don't have time for irrelevant anecdotes." "Not anecdotes," Dane replied, calm as ever. "I'm attempting to grasp the Council's collective stance on warfare. How it weighs into diplomacy. Context, you see." Alira Voss felt the familiar ache in her stomach, that hollowed-out feeling that crept in before a drop. She'd heard that voice before. Cool. Clinical. The same tone Dane used during mission briefings, right before everything caught fire. "Context for what?" demanded Beekser, his tone sharpened. Dane reached slowly into his coat and retrieved a small metallic device, sleek, ordinary, diplomatic in appearance. He pressed its surface, and a hollow emitter burst to life above the dais, casting light across every face in the chamber. "This," Dane said, is our homeworld Earth. The image spun gently. Oceans and green land masses bathed in cloud, turning peacefully in the void. Current population, 8 billion. Humans. We've been venturing beyond our atmosphere for 47 years now, just as you've noted. The delegates barely glanced at the projection. Most had seen planetary holograms before. A world was a world. These newcomers just happened to occupy one. Dane gestured, and the image flickered. Let's widen the view. This is our recorded military timeline for the past century. The new projection showed a glowing timeline marked in tiny crimson flashes, thousands of them, peppered across the decades like blood droplets across parchment. Karn leaned forward, curious despite himself. What do those symbols represent? Each one marks a significant conflict, Dane said evenly. A battle, a war, or a violent engagement involving organized forces. Murmurs rippled through the room. Over 14,000 such events in just the last 100 years. That number hung in the air like radiation. Vaskrin barked a laugh, harsh and disbelieving. Preposterous. A civilization would collapse under that level of internal chaos. You're not wrong, Dane said softly. Most would, but we didn't. He walked slowly around the platform now, letting his words settle into their bones. Humanity doesn't wage one war every generation. We conduct dozens, sometimes hundreds, at once, while building cities, colonizing moons, advancing medicine, flying faster than light. The hollow shifted again, this time zooming in on dense clusters of red. A decade at a time, conflict upon conflict. These sectors represent ongoing engagements. You'll notice, no decade in our history is free of violence. Alira scanned the alien faces, once indifferent, now transfixed. Something in their posture had shifted. Amusement had drained away. Even Karn's limbs had stilled. Our resource wars alone, Dane continued, his voice as casual as a professor's, engaged more than 2 billion personnel. Just one campaign, on one continent. He flicked again. The Andaran flashpoint resolved in just 18 days. The Avon Rift campaign resolved in just 18 hours, Dane said, turning the hologram again. The Continental Pact War in Europa, 3 years. 47 aligned states. Fronts on land, sea, space. You're describing a species of madmen, muttered the Corvani delegate, his crimson scales noticeably dimmer. No, Dane replied, unflinching. I'm describing a species forged by necessity. While you refined negotiation, we refined combat. Every war refined our understanding, strategy, infrastructure, psychological resilience. He let the weight of the words hang. We didn't have centuries to overpower isolated primitives. We fought peers, matched in intellect, will, and firepower. Every time. The hologram shifted again, now displaying hard data, blueprints, silhouettes of war machines, weapon systems, kinetic armor grids. Alira recognized some of it, classified specs. Our modern combat systems aren't built for domination, Dane continued. They're engineered for survival, for fighting enemies who know everything we know, who think like us. Who are us? Warlord Vaskrin rose slowly, muscles tense. You intend to frighten us with tales of internal savagery? Dane didn't blink. General, with all due respect, you've conquered 6 species in 2 centuries, aided by overwhelming force and superior weaponry. His voice dropped slightly. Humanity's been engaged in symmetrical warfare, with balanced numbers and tech parity, for millennia. He let that hang. Which of us do you think produces better soldiers? The chamber fell still again. Alira watched as unease rippled through the gathered envoys. The same beings who had laughed before now exchanged uncertain glances. Dane moved forward, voice level. And there's something else. He reached down, unlatched his case, and retrieved a thin, matte black dossier. I believe some of you assumed I was here as a conventional envoy. Karn's limbs stilled. For the first time, the Synthari bureaucrat didn't move. "What exactly are you saying, Terran?" he asked, his tone uneven. Dane opened the folder and read aloud without emotion. Colonel Dane Corrin, Terran Special Warfare Division. Active combatant in the Oxygen Wars, Echelon Collapse, and the Europa Fireline. 17 confirmed theater operations. 43 classified missions. Not a sound. Even the rhythmic hum of atmosphere regulators had faded. Dane shut the folder gently. "You see, honored delegates," he said softly, "when Earth meets new life, we don't send negotiators." His gaze scanned the room. "We send survivors, fighters, those who've killed and endured against the deadliest adversaries we know." Warlord Vaskrin finally spoke again, though the gravel in his voice was softer now. "And who," he asked, "are these adversaries?" Dane smiled for the second time since stepping onto the Echelon spire. It was not a smile of peace. He looked straight at Vaskrin. "Other humans, General." He paused. "We send our killers, because we've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing ourselves." Something in Vaskrin's face twisted, not in mockery, but in something approaching dread. Whatever certainty he'd entered the chamber with, it was gone. Vaskrin's skin deepened to a shade near obsidian as he rose to his full, towering height, 8 feet of armored muscle and fury. "You dare insert a soldier into a diplomatic assembly?" he bellowed, his voice cracking across the chamber. "You come here, telling ghost stories of your brutal past, as if they are threats?" Dane Corrin remained still. Impossibly still. His voice didn't rise. It didn't falter. "I've issued no threats, General," he said flatly. "I've only corrected a few dangerous assumptions." "Deceit," hissed Lexicon Karn, limbs thrashing with fury. "Misdirection and hostility. Typical. This is exactly what we expected from your savage kind." At the center, Beekser stepped forward on the high dais, eyes dark with decision. "Station security," he commanded sharply. "Remove the Terran delegation. They have breached protocol." Alira Voss shifted, her instincts flaring to life. She knew this moment. She'd seen it in black sites and border skirmishes. This was the breath between diplomacy and violence, the heartbeat before someone reached for a weapon. Her hand found her diplomatic satchel, moving without thought. 2 colossal Zarvek enforcers entered from the chamber's side doors, their obsidian armor gleaming beneath the council lights. Each carried an energy weapon capable of neutralizing a siege squad. Their steps were heavy with arrogance. Soldiers who had never tasted defeat. "You will come with us," the lead guard barked, his voice distorted through helmet speakers. "Comply, and no harm will come." Dane turned to face them, expression unreadable. He smoothed his tie with one hand, calmly closing his portfolio with the other. It was a motion without urgency, controlled, measured. "Alira," he said, eyes locked on the advancing soldiers. "Protocol 7. She moved quickly, efficiently. To any observer, it appeared she was packing up to depart. But her fingers found the hidden switches beneath the satchel's reinforced grip. Not standard diplomatic tools, something else entirely. The first enforcer reached out, hand extended toward Dane's shoulder. "Do not resist, I'm afraid," Dane said, pivoting just slightly. "That won't be possible." What followed took less than 3 seconds. Alira saw everything. Dane's right hand snapped upward, catching the enforcer's wrist with surgical speed. The armored hand spasmed. The weapon clattered to the floor. His left hand surged to the guard's helmet, locating the exact weak point where armor met spine. One sharp twist. The guard dropped, alive, but out cold. The second enforcer had already drawn his rifle. It was nearly raised when Dane moved again, fluid as shadow. A sweeping kick took the guard's legs from beneath him. Before the heavy body could hit the floor, Dane snatched the falling weapon midair and stripped the power cell in one motion. Silence cracked. Then all hell broke loose. Alien delegates surged from their seats, some shouting in panic, others barking orders into comlinks. Lights strobed red. Sirens shrieked across the station. The order of the chamber collapsed into disarray. Dane stood in the chaos, tall, unruffled, a phantom in a tailored suit. Two motionless bodies lay at his feet. He hadn't even broken stride. Didn't even break a sweat, Alira muttered, eyes still scanning for threats. Status? Dane asked, cool as ever. Protocol 7's fully engaged, she confirmed. Her case now sat open at her feet, no longer concealing its true contents. Blinking nodes, signal disruptors, and encrypted modules, once disguised as innocent cultural trinkets, now hummed to life. What had looked like art and hospitality was in fact precision-engineered intelligence hardware. In the human wing of the station, concealed transmitters activated in sync. Beacons pulsed outward, hijacking station-wide communication nodes. On the floor above, Vaskrin barked orders into his tactical array. All units. Council chamber. Full alert. Intruder status. Red directive. But the chamber speakers crackled only with fragmented static. His commands dissolved midstream. All frequencies jammed. All control rerouted. Around the chamber, other envoys were experiencing the same. Keypads dead. Headsets emitting white noise. Every line had gone dark. Dane reached inside his jacket and retrieved a sleek badge, nothing more than standard diplomat credentials, until his thumb pressed the seal on its reverse. Across the chamber walls, massive holoscreens came to life. Not welcome banners. Not station schematics. Top secret council data flooded the displays. Tactical fleet deployments. Warfleet patrol cycles. Covert operation transcripts. Dane studied the data as it scrolled across. Riveting material, he said dryly. You folks might want to revisit your cybersecurity protocols. Karn stared in paralyzed disbelief. Those files, they're sealed under Nexus clearance, he rasped. Access is physically impossible. Yes, Dane replied, glancing at the flickering display. It is. He didn't elaborate. Alira, he asked. She didn't look up from her interface. 80% completed. All core systems mapped. Backdoors identified. The room was changing. Panic sharpened into realization. This hadn't been a failed negotiation. It had been a mission. Every smile, every handshake, every shared gift and gesture of goodwill. It had all been calibrated to infiltrate the Galactic Concord's Central Command. You orchestrated this, Beekser said slowly, his disbelief slipping into fury. This wasn't diplomacy. This was reconnaissance. Dane gave a single nod. Naturally. Did you truly believe Earth would step blindly into an interstellar civilization without first understanding the predators in the room? He paused. We've been studying you for months. At the entrance, a platoon of guards arrived. Heavy armor, weapons primed. But when they tried to enter, the chamber doors didn't budge. From the outside, they could see everything through the transparent polyglass. But they were locked out, trapped. Inside, Dane turned back to the stun chamber. The ceremonial artifacts we distributed, each one contains a Tier 9 surveillance core. We've been listening, mapping, analyzing every function of this facility since the moment we disembarked. Counselors fumbled for explanations, some for weapons. Vaskrin's communicator finally pinged with a stable link. Deploy full force, he snarled. Treat the Terrans as enemy combatants. Engage. Dane's head tilted slightly. He turned to face the towering general. I wouldn't advise that. Vaskrin sneered. And why not? Dane's expression cooled into something glacial. Because right now, he said, every species in this chamber is watching you. Every delegate. Every system with an active uplink. He pointed around the room, to the Corvani, to the Synthari, to the Vale, the Gorak, the NYLL. They're all seeing the same thing, their almighty council, outflanked, outwitted, and powerless, by two humans with a suitcase. Across the walls, the screens flickered again, splitting into quadrants. Live views from surveillance cams showed every major sector of the station, from the upper corridors to the central archive servers, all under Terran control. The council screens shimmered one final time, classified intel fading out, replaced by broadcast overlays. Live news feeds, dozens of them, from orbiting relay satellites, trade hubs, and inner core colonies. Across 5 quadrants, the galaxy was watching live. Every species, every faction, every civilian government. The story had spread faster than the council could suppress it. "Elira," Dane asked. She tapped twice on her case. "Transmission complete," she confirmed. "Full intelligence packages are in Earth Command's hands." Dane straightened his jacket, casually dusted off a non-existent wrinkle, and lifted his leather-bound portfolio. "Well then," he said, turning toward the exit, "this has been enlightening." They walked in silence. Not a single delegate moved. No threats. No protests. Just stunned silence, like statues witnessing the crumbling of an old religion. At the chamber doors, Dane paused and glanced back one last time. "Oh, and General?" His eyes locked with Vaskrin's, now visibly shaken. "What you saw here," Dane said, voice low but sharp, "was a diplomat trying very hard not to hurt anyone. He let that sink in. You really don't want to meet the ones we call soldiers." 7 days later, Dane Corrin strode once more through the halls of the Echelon Spire, but everything had changed. Where once guards had blocked his path, now they stepped aside, offering respectful nods. Alien envoys, once dismissive, now offered formal greetings. And the human section, no longer tucked in the shadows, had been expanded, now placed centrally, lined with polished steel, new banners fluttering in the station's recycled air. Elira walked beside him, carrying the same briefcase. But no one mistook it for luggage anymore. The galaxy knew. They passed a group of veiled scholars who glanced at the case and immediately looked away. "The intel's still coming in," Elira whispered. "Every major power's running deep analysis on our war records." "And?" Dane asked, not breaking stride. "Several are requesting joint defense pacts. Some are even proposing strategic exchange programs." Dane nodded slowly. Fear has a way of clearing the diplomatic fog. She smirked. "Negotiations. Far more civil," she replied. "Turns out they're quite reasonable, once they know who's sitting across the table." They reached the chamber doors again. Same structure, same 12 seats, but the atmosphere? Utterly different. Before, the room had felt like a cage, a trial, a theater of arrogance. Now it felt like a courtroom, and every species seated within understood who held the gavel. Dane walked the aisle alone. Elira remained behind. This time, there was no fear in their movements, only silence, focused, intent, like prey watching a silent predator. Beekser, still standing at the central dais, waited with a shallow bow of his head. The medals on his uniform seemed to gleam less today. His voice lacked the thunder it once held. "Ambassador Corrin," he said carefully, "we trust your return to Earth was fruitful." Dane took a seat, center position now, and calmly set down his case and portfolio. "Very productive," he answered. "Earth has reviewed the Council's revised proposals. Gone were the ultimatums. Gone were the isolation protocols and containment directives. The new terms? Markedly different. Trade alliances, technology pacts, joint defense protocols. The transformation had been swift, almost surreal. When Vaskrin finally spoke, his gravelly voice was subdued, humbled. "The Zaphar Dominion offers a formal apology for the misunderstanding during your last appearance. Our security forces acted beyond their mandate." Dane Corrin noted something in his portfolio, his pen moving in slow, measured strokes. "Apology acknowledged, General. No lasting harm was done." Lexicon Karn's limbs twitched nervously over his holopad. The once confident Helix envoy seemed unsure, even rattled. "We've completed a full audit of Terran combat capabilities," he said, his voice faltering. "It appears we may have misjudged your species' potential." From the opposite wing, the Corvani envoy let out a low exhale. "Misjudged is a diplomatic understatement." Dane scanned the room, his expression unchanged, just quiet, steady authority. "I hope the Council understands. Humanity holds no resentment toward any species here. But we had to ensure our first contact occurred on equal footing." "Equal footing," Beekser echoed thoughtfully. "Yes, that is now very clear." What no one said aloud, but every representative understood, was that the past week had been chaos behind closed doors. Emergency summits, late-night military briefings. Intelligence divisions across all 12 civilizations had been scrambling to make sense of what had unfolded. The terrifying part? The humans had shared some of what they gathered. The rest, the truly dangerous files, remained locked in Earth's vaults. But what the Council had received was damning enough. A complete map of fleet deployments, vulnerability profiles, war doctrine logs. Humanity knew everything. And the Council knew almost nothing about Earth. A figure from the Veil Union cleared their throat. "The territorial limitations from the prior proposals have been fully withdrawn. Your people are free to expand beyond your home system, within reason and shared galactic boundaries." "We've revised the tech packs as well," Karn added quickly. "Rather than limiting Terran innovation, we propose cooperative development, cross-species exchange, shared benefits." Dane gave a small nod. "These are positive signs. Humanity values adaptability and sincerity." What he didn't mention, but what everyone in the room had already realized, was why these proposals had changed so quickly. The real catalyst had come from the data after the meeting. Dozens of species had turned their scanners toward Terran archives. And what they found was unnerving. The resource wars alone had involved planet-splitting payloads, devices designed not just to destroy cities, but to fracture tectonic plates. The Australian collapse had ended when humans triggered artificial atmospheric shifts, rerouting typhoons like weapons. The European crisis had introduced autonomous battalions operating without supplies for months, deep inside enemy territory. Ghost armies that never left a trace. But none of that terrified the Council as much as one revelation: unity. Despite centuries of internal strife, of revolution, civil war, political fragmentation, humanity had an uncanny trait. When threatened from the outside, they could unite. Fast, decisively. Every major war had ended with the fractured factions of Earth binding themselves into something stronger. Their history was a brutal forge, and the species that stepped from it wasn't just dangerous. It was resilient. And now the galaxy knew. What made humans dangerous wasn't just their weaponry. It was what came after the war. They didn't conquer and discard. They absorbed. They took the ashes of every fallen enemy and used them as bricks, building the next version of themselves. Stronger, sharper, more dangerous. A quiet moment settled before Vaskrin rose once more, his words cautious. "There is one last matter." He paused, eyes darting across his peers. "The Council would like to extend an invitation to Earth to take part in our Unified Defense Accord." Dane tilted his head slightly. "You're inviting us to join your military coalition?" "Not join," Beekser interjected swiftly. "Lead." A ripple passed through the room. No one contradicted it. The offer was staggering. A species unknown to galactic records a week ago was now being asked to command the collective security forces of a dozen civilizations. But the logic was clear. If Earth was going to be part of the galactic theater, better as an ally than as an adversary. Beside him, Alira leaned in, whispering something only Dane could hear. He nodded once and jotted a brief note in his ledger. "Earth receives this honor with humility," he said aloud. We'll need to confer with our leadership, but we're open to taking a role in galactic stability." "Excellent," Karn buzzed, his relief evident despite his mechanical tone. The session drew to a close. But the real diplomacy was just beginning. One by one, ambassadors and envoys began to approach Dane directly, no longer as skeptics, but as petitioners. They wanted bilateral agreements, exclusive trade talks, security assurances, treaties. Even the species that had once issued threats were now scrambling to become Earth's preferred partner. As the room emptied, Dane and Alira walked side by side down the polished corridor. The same halls that had once echoed with mockery now pulsed with respectful silence. Aliens moved aside as they passed. Some nodded, others merely stepped away with careful deference. It had taken 7 days, and not a single weapon fired. "Think that counts as mission complete?" Alira asked as they neared the shuttle bay. Dane adjusted his tie and glanced back one last time at the towering council spire. "Alira," he said softly, "we didn't come here to join their world." He paused. "We came to introduce them to ours." The transport rose quietly from the docks, its thrusters casting soft blue light on the walls of Harmony Spire. Inside, 2 Terran operatives reclined in silence, watching a starfield that now felt very different. Behind them, across 12 worlds, emergency sessions were already underway. Policy manuals were being rewritten, strategic doctrines thrown out, ancient assumptions tossed into the void. The galactic order had changed, and not through force, but through precision. In the end, the most dangerous weapon Earth had deployed wasn't its fleet or its firepower. It was something older, something harder to define. The ability to wield both war and peace with equal mastery, and the judgment to know which one to draw, and when. The stars would never take humanity lightly again. The galaxy will never underestimate humanity again, and neither should you. If that story made your pulse quicken, hit that like button, share it with someone who doubts what humans are capable of, and subscribe for more tales where Earth doesn't bow, it leads. We've only just begun.